Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, we have a brand new listener with a brand new prompt, and we're going to dive right into that. But before we do, I always want to remind you that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, you can always go to our Twitter at Let's World Build. Or if you want to come and chat with us more directly about all sorts of stuff, including The Last of Us or some other stuff that I have in mind, you can always do so by clicking a link in the description and joining our Discord, where you can chat with us and other members of the community. Of course, if you're feeling particularly generous and want to support World Build with us, you can always go to our Patreon, where you can give us money, and in return, we'll give you access to early episodes, patron exclusive episodes, stuff that we can't air on podcasting platforms for myriad reasons, among other really fun and interesting goodies. So if you're interested in doing that, or just giving us a little tip, you can always go to our Patreon. And with all of the shilling out of the way, let's go right ahead and dive right into this brand new prompt from our new listener, Cam. So Cam, thank you so much for submitting a prompt, and thank you for listening. It's always great to hear from new listeners and get new prompts. So our prompt this time from Cam says, love the podcast and decided to finally submit a prompt. A modern fantasy world where spells are not learned, but given and bought. Land of 1,000 spells, parentheses, maybe, we'll see. The tenets are, there is one deity who, when given an offering, will return a spell. This deity has become industrialized in the modern era. They exist in a somewhat physical form within the world. Tenet number 2, spells are spoken. And number 3, spells can only have relatively minor effects. And so, with all of that, I'm very excited to dive into a modern fantasy world. And to start us off, Courtney, you are currently the holder of my Dresden Files book collection. So I believe that it's only fair that Daniel start us off. So Daniel, what do you got for our first tenet today?
So much switcherooing.
I've maintained this switching consistently for the last, I want to say, like 4 to 5 episodes.
Yeah.
And
at least, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to maintain this until I tire of it. And considering my personality, we'll see how long that is. Daniel, tell us what your first tenet is.
So I remember reading this book that was about interpreting Star Wars in different ways. And one of the essays I thought was very interesting posited that in the Star Wars universe, people actually can't read. And it showed various ways to interpret the universe in that context, that like people are really just like, you know, looking at diagrams and screens and illustrations rather than actual reading texts, which is kind of neat. So in this setting, because spells are this sort of disseminated material that people acquire, my tenet is that people are just not literate. And literacy is an incredibly rare skill akin to esoteric knowledge.
So like knowing how to speak like Aramaic or Latin or something like that.
Oh, no, being able to read at all.
No. But I'm saying that it's akin to knowing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like an unusual, rare skill to have, is to be able to read and write.
Or it's like it's treated as a party trick where it's like, oh, look, Daniel can read Aramaic. Daniel, say something in Aramaic, you know, like something like that.
Yeah.
That's cool, because I feel like we often take literacy for granted in world building stuff. And the reality is, like, for vast portions of history, most people didn't know how to read.
Yeah.
So it's kind of something that we just assume, like, you pick up any fantasy novel set in a generic European medieval Renaissance setting, and everybody knows how to read, of course, even like the peasants who are shoveling poop or whatever. But
poop peasants.
Yeah, the poop shovelers.
Poop smiths. Oh my God.
The poop smiths. Yep.
Courtney, I'm so glad that you brought up history, because now I can talk about how history matters. Yes, you're absolutely correct here, Courtney. This is definitely something that is, I would probably argue, is partially reinforced by the relationship between the Christian church and its peasantry and the people who follow. Because for a long time, the church believed that being able to read the Bible was a major part of like maintaining and holding power. So translating the Bible into modern languages. So German was a really big one that actually caused like massive uproars and calls for excommunication and all sorts of other things. So the ability to read and translate the holy word of God, as in the Bible, was actually a massive thing. So like, I would imagine that, I mean, if I were to be cynical, that the church was probably okay with not teaching people how to read to maintain some modicum of power in that way. But also, like, let's be real, like people didn't have the time to read back then unless you had leisure time, but that was very rare. So yes. Okay. That's it. I'm done with my history thing. But yes, Daniel, that's a very cool concept. And I think that I have a tenet that might help ease that just a little bit, or at least kind of give context to that. But before we get into that, let's continue to talk about Daniel's thing.
Yeah. Thinking about how like spells can only have minor effects. I mean, maybe a minor effect that a spell could have is like, I can read this paper or something like that. Like I can temporarily comprehend this language in its written form. And then that wears off and you go about your day.
Okay. I've got an idea actually, and it doesn't have to do with anything to do with my tenets, but how do we feel about something happening where language or words have been cursed? So it's literally like damn near impossible to read words just because like some eldritch horror was like, hey, I'm going to make it impossible for script to be read. So it's like you're looking at words and they're like warping and forming or something like that. And like, I'm thinking about this as like an origin point for why like magic exists in the form that it does. So it's like the Eldritch being made this the way it is to stop wizards from being able to cast spells, except they just transferred the ability to cast spells from reading words to just like saying them, something like that. And I know I'm jumping way ahead here, but like I'm just like, I got the seed. Let me water it real quick. Let me see what y'all think.
I mean, it could be interesting as a reason why people can't read, but I'd be curious to hold on to that and see what the other tenets are to see how it could fit in potentially.
All right. Well, I'm fine with that as well. So I did say that I have a segue, but Courtney should probably go after I get rid of my segue. So what I'll do is my first light tenet. This is like a little soft one that I just thought was kind of fun. When they say that spells are spoken, I'm going to use that term liberally. And I'm going to suggest that spells have to be sung in some way. And the pitch and the way you deliver that spell is important and matters. So you can do spoken word poetry, but there has to be some performance to the spell in some way when you perform it.
Interesting.
So it will lend itself to especially interesting languages where the words mean different things depending on how they're intoned, like like Chinese language and stuff like that.
Which is why like you're able to perform in different ways. And I imagine that's like wizards perform or magic users, like perform differently depending on which culture they come from, because it might have a rich tradition of like poetry or a rich tradition of like singing or something like that. Like that's kind of an interesting way that we can kind of figure it out as well.
Yeah, the fact that like pitch and rhythm and things like that matter in speaking these spells, like that also paves the way for like apprenticeships and the importance of education and knowing like, no, you say it like this, not this, the whole, I'm just thinking of that quote from Harry Potter,
Leviosa. Yeah, exactly.
Like that sort of thing, where like you have to get the pronunciation and everything exactly right for the impact that you want the spell to have. Because if you stumble over a word or if you say it in the wrong key, it could have effects that you don't really want.
I was also thinking of like the pitch of your voice, like if you're singing it, right? Like then all of a sudden singing talent matters. And because it's modern fantasy, my brain immediately goes to like smoky black and white neo-noir or noir bar. And there's the femme fatale singing in one of those old style microphones. And like all of a sudden she is the object of attention and power because of the way that she sings, something like that. But I think that's just my brain works filmically a lot of the time is what I've found.
If we're in a truly modern setting too, then like what about things like auto-tune and like that sort of adjustment as you're singing?
Yeah, that's actually super interesting, right? Not just auto-tune for your own enhancement, right? Like, oh, I'm going to make this spell powerful. They're amplifiers, quite literally in some cases. But perhaps like being able to pitch down or warp the pitch of your enemy in some way as a form of like counter spell. Like that's kind of interesting to kind of mess with as well. That's fun.
It does raise questions depending on how modern this is. Modern could mean, the 19th century, could mean near future. If this inability to read and B, the need to pronounce things can't be mediated by technology in some way. Because, for example, even 10 years ago, we had a limited like Google Translate sort of stuff. And we had text to speech and things like that. So I imagine if there is a curse, for example, that might be part of what's stopping this from working. Because if we're going to be in a technological context, then we'll have to worry about technology solving problems too.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you can't read, like, what does that imply? Like, how would technology work? How does technology differ? Like, what does the internet look like if we are in a truly modern age? Like things are going to vary wildly, I would imagine.
It might be that like much of the way our communications are designed are pictographic or video based or, not blocks of text. And so the internet has been designed differently. And everything is based on visual symbols rather than text. So it might just be totally foreign to them. And so the technology was never really developed for it.
Okay, I know that I brought this up recently and I'm going to bring it up again because I don't care. This is just where my brain is going. Daniel, it's the Star Trek episode with the language, Daniel, that one where it's like Tarnak and Janad meet on the whatever. That one. Yes. Yeah, because I imagine that's like an easy way that we can treat shorthand and stuff like, and I would imagine that like when you have, like idioms like that as a language, there's a reason for it for shortcutting and stuff like that. So just a concept maybe we can consider,
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah. There is, going back to like the visual representation of ideas and stuff, there's a concept in like quote unquote real life magic of sigils that are drawn or engraved and that are used for spells. Yeah. So that could be what these like spells are.
No, you're super right, Courtney. I love that idea, actually. Technically not words, but like just symbols and
shapes.
Yeah.
Although I do want to stress that part of the reason why I introduced illiteracy is to raise the value of people who can read.
Yes.
Because then your spellcasters are the ones who can read.
Right. Yeah. I don't think we're arguing that sigils replace written language. I'm just suggesting that that's a possibility as sigils existing. Well, Courtney suggested it, but you know what I mean.
To communicate in general, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, as like general, broader communications, maybe. Like we were talking about how would the internet function, and maybe there's a series of sigils that power the internet, like something like that.
Right.
Yeah, but I think they're too abstract for true like communication.
It's not the same as like a pair, because like I'm picturing like they may have this sigil based kind of communications that are like for marketing and for basic communication on the web. Like it's like a soft side, right? Like it's not a written language, but things that spells themselves, being that they're also songs in a sense, those are contextual. Like they have length to them and they're in a written language.
All right. So Courtney, is it your turn to go?
I think so. Yes.
I believe it is. So Courtney, why don't you hit us with your first tenet? We can go from there.
All right. So I'd had a lot of fun with our space communist setting we did in Utopia of a Thousand Laws and wanted to experiment again with thinking about alternatives to capitalism. So I want
Mother of God.
So I want there to be at least one country or city-state or something like that in this world that treats spells as something distributed to its people according to their needs. So in other words, the government there gives spells to its people and maybe acquires them through trade or taxation or has priests on hand to make offerings for them.
Editing, Courtney, please put in the USSR national anthem here for our listeners in full. And if it's not in full, then you're fired. So, yeah, no, that's good. I like that. Yeah, actually, I like that a lot. That's really fun. But I appreciate the idea that, magic is for everyone. And it is this kind of communal resource that I'm very curious to see how that developed.
That does raise an interesting question, because it also is saying then that reading is for everyone, but if the spells are distributed freely in a communist sort of way, only certain people can read them. So then when people acquire spells, like, do they acquire them because they want to keep them in their library to then hire someone to read them for them or sing the songs for them? Or like, how's the transactional process work?
Yeah, I suppose we haven't really figured out the economics of the spells, right? So the prompt is that spells are not learned, but given and bought, right? But we don't know the origin point of spells necessarily, right?
Well, there's like the one deity who can give spells in return for offerings, but
and it's industrialized too.
Yeah, it doesn't specify that that's the only source.
Right, exactly. So I'm curious as maybe this alternative communal kind of like magic system found a different source of something, you know?
Oh, I like that. Like, maybe because the industrialization of the deities suggests something counter to what Courtney's suggesting, because Courtney's describing a society that maybe it is industrialized, but industrialized has the connotation of being part of like capital and
right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's more of a money-based thing, right? Whereas what she's suggesting isn't. Perhaps in their society, they've learned how to create their own or write their own spells or stories. And because they have more literate people versus wherever the industrialized god is, you know, they don't want to create them. They're just making them from this god.
Interesting. Yeah. So actually going into this prompt, I guess I wasn't picturing spells as needing a written language component, but it sounds like, Daniel, you want that.
In my mind, I had pictured these. Obviously, I pictured like scrolls or something written down. And I imagine it could still be the case that a spell is transmitted by oral tradition, for example, or by being sung, right? But in order to sing it, you'd have to understand the written language, or at least you have to understand the words, right? Not necessarily being written. And it could be that in your society, they don't necessarily write them down. Perhaps they convey them, through oral tradition.
Yeah.
But maybe in the other society, they're written down.
This is the song that never ends, and it's the source of all of our magical power, so no one stops singing it in the system. Like,
I mean, I could see them being written down by this industrialized space and passed along as pieces of paper versus maybe spoken in yours.
Interesting.
But there is something to the idea of like oral tradition, right? Like there is a power to a song that never ends, to a song that repeats over and over again. So there's a thrum of power that perhaps is either amplified over time or through rounds or something like that, that is just maintained, right? Like that's their tradition, is to always maintain this song.
I like that a lot. Yeah, like a cathedral or a temple or something where the same spell or sequence of spells has been sung for hundreds of years. In like shifts of singers and stuff. That's a cool image, yeah.
And then when you like carry a tune in your heart, you're literally like carrying a vestige of that power with you, right? And that's kind of interesting to think about, I think. I don't know, that's kind of cool.
Well, we don't necessarily lose the illiteracy component there either, because someone can repeat an oral tradition and not necessarily understand what's being spoken. Like some of these songs might be transmitted without truly understanding the literal things they're saying.
That's true,
Versus in the other place where the supposed other place where things are written down, those people who are literate can actually read it, and perhaps a literate person can understand the song that's being spoken in Courtney's group,
Yeah, I mean, like I know the lyrics to songs that I don't know what they mean because they're in different languages, but I still know the lyrics, that's absolutely a way that you can think about it for sure.
I mean, and furthermore, I bet understanding the words, to your original point, Rob, is more powerful than simply repeating them.
Yeah, but repeating them is still part of the process. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Oh, that's fun. That's really dope. Look at this world coming together and stuff like that. How about that? All right, cool. All right, Daniel, let's jump back to you then. So get us started, Daniel. What is tenant number 2 for you? What's that look like?
I think Courtney, having created a separate group, actually lends to what I was thinking about with this one. But my tenant was that this industrialized god has actually been broken down into multiple pieces and separately exploited for the production of spells as capital.
Gross.
And so I imagine, we have one group, for example, the ones we were talking about producing physical paper, and I'm picturing like a factory for some reason that has a piece of this god. And maybe the ones who have learned to transmit the songs by oral tradition, maybe in the cathedral, there's a piece of it that's always singing or emits music, maybe, I don't know, that inspires them to keep singing. And there could be other pieces in other societies.
Interesting.
So is it like the more of this deity that you control, the more power that you potentially have?
I think so. I think the more perhaps of the one true language you have,
Yeah. How deep do we want to go when we're talking about broken down into component parts here? Are we talking about like the finger bone of a saint, like type relic, or is it like you need like a whole ass head or like a hand or something like that? Like how far down the component parts list are we looking here?
When I was thinking about it in my head, I was thinking of the deity as not having a traditional body, I wasn't picturing a person. So I was thinking very big chunks, and there's only so many of them. So like less than 10, and they're big.
Okay.
But for countries to have.
Okay, that makes sense. But when you define them as chunks, right? Like that suddenly becomes slightly disconcerting to me because it's like just random chunks of meat, that you put together to make a giant meatball, and we have the meatball god. Like,
again, I thought of it as not
non-human. No, I understand, but
not physical, even though almost like golem-like,
Okay, that I can understand. So we can also even take out like the physiology or the, like, so we can make it so it's like perhaps a bunch of runes that you put together to create like a golem or something like that.
Like it doesn't have to be like a heart and a head. I was thinking like pieces of an object that is the god, and it's big.
Sure. I'm going to use my third tenet to say that one of them is a heart, because I think that cool, is, that's cool.
Like crystalline heart. Like I'm picturing them being because like I didn't want individuals to have pieces of this. It's more like factions would. So like, like a country would have one hunk of it.
But of course, those factions have heads, and the heads are going to be individuals. So I imagine that they're going to be people who are more or less in direct control, like monarchs and stuff like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's really dope.
That also raises the question of what happens when those are broken down further. Like, is there a risk of like greed in trying to break things down even more? Would that dilute the magic power that exists in the world?
Oh,
I think that would be an interesting like storyline for a piece of it. And then we could raise questions like, does it, like you're saying, does it dilute its power? But I wonder I imagine that they're treated as very sacred things that you wouldn't want to break down.
Yeah.
We don't know if you'll just break it if you do that.
The alternative, of course, is that we have it so 10 is just the number that we have currently and is not the original number of component parts, right? So you can have tales of, this nation tried to do it, and now that's a wasteland or something.
They lost their language forever,
For example, and so now like being mute is like this kind of symbol of great shame, right? Not to bring ableism into it or anything like that, but like that kind of thing.
It really sounds like a cool bardic campaign.
Yeah, like it's something where like you've lost your singing voice, so you can no longer sing the spells.
Oh, so the arch enemy in this one is Ursula from The Little Mermaid. Then got it.
Yep, exactly.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
The talk of the golem imagery and then the sigils from earlier makes me think of like sacred geometry and the idea that certain geometric shapes have these sacred meanings or concepts behind them, and so maybe the golem form is a series of these sacred shapes that.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, if it was all like put back together, it would be this essentially like an artwork in itself.
Yeah, or a great machine that gets put together, or like moves as it gets put together. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And then that also, the geometries like that speak to the shapes of instruments too. So like I imagine things in their societies have been constructed after the mathematics in it, which, because mathematics is a form of language. It's like maybe like it's mathematics and that's sort of the language, the fragment of the language it contains. Because then you have like factions that speak different languages or have different written languages that only certain people understand, since most people are illiterate, but it derives from these objects.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm down. This is this. You can start to see the shape of it. And for my second tenet, I've decided to be really weird and really specific. So I've decided to essentially suggest that there is a major faction that is made up of an organized syndicate of mummies. And because it's modern fantasy, modern, of course, meaning that we have better preservation techniques for mummies. So it's not the traditional wrapped in linens and stuff like that. That's kind of like a vestige of the old ways. No, instead, these modern mummies have more modern science to maintain their rotting, decaying corpses, including stuff like Botox, makeup, or latex and stuff like that. But considering all the sigil stuff that we're talking about here, I think that there is some way that they're utilizing this magic to maintain their form in some way. Or maybe it's a consequence that we can talk about. But I got mummies, and they're an organized crime syndicate. They don't necessarily have to be an entire faction or even controllers of a particular sigil. Maybe they run throughout. But that's what I got, and I'll let you guys go from there. Mind you, I do want to provide some context here. We're recording this shortly after the Oscars, and our boy Brendan Fraser won Best Actor. What better way to honor Brendan Fraser than to bring up the 1999 classic starring Brendan Fraser?
Of course.
So in honor of his Oscar win, that is part of the reason that we're introducing mummies here. Continue on, speech over.
Yes, congratulations to Brendan Fraser, star of the 1999 classic The Mummy.
I think that you're going to have to addend that statement to Oscar winner.
Yes, Oscar winner Brendan Fraser,
and star of the 1999 Mummy. Yes, exactly.
I'm picturing like the sort of wraps that mummies had, but like inscribed with these sigils and geometric forms, and that's what is keeping them alive, giving them life. And maybe for like their dealings in the outer world, they can remove those wraps and appear as just people. So it's sort of a ritual that they need to do to wrap themselves so that they don't start to decay horribly.
Ooh. I love that it's just kind of, it's random, but somehow it makes sense. And if it's one of those ideas where we can fill it with meaning because it really points us in a particular direction. And so it makes me think, okay, what do mummies mean? Mummies are like they're an attempt to preserve something about the culture. They're part of, they say something about the afterlife, right? Because then the Egyptians believe in like the body being physically conveyed into the afterlife in some sense. That's why they have to take their organs out.
That's why the preservation was so important to them.
Yeah, and important. So in the modern setting, what does that mean to preserve the body in the living sense? And then we have missing language. There's a lot of options here, which I like.
Like, not to mention that, like, in terms of hieroglyphs and in terms of like literal pictograms and stuff like that, using that as like wraps, as you know, each wrap tells a story or something like that. However, I do want to push, like, we don't have a specific timeline, but I do want to maintain that plastic surgery is still a viable option for these gross mummies, because I think that that's a really fun way of doing it. Now, the other alternative is, instead of linen, is you can have like leather wraps or leather straps, so they take on a more modern look that way as well. They're still inscribed with these pictogram sigils, etc. But I think that my attempts to modernize the mummy are within those kind of contexts. But thematically, let's talk about what Daniel was talking about, because I'm also really interested in talking about that as well.
What I don't want to lose sight either of the idea, like Jordan was saying, them wrapping them themselves in sigils. Like, what does that mean? Like, what is that going to suggest for us? And also, other question I have is like, we don't necessarily have a villain yet, although there's a suggestion that this industrialized society seems sinister. But I almost feel like for some reason the mummies have something nefarious about them. Maybe not directly nefarious and malicious, because we're going to expect mummies to be evil. So that's an expectation. Maybe they have like goals that are at odds with others, you know. But I think there's potential there for them to be some form of conflict. You know?
Well, I mean, they are a crime syndicate, right? Like, I think that's pretty explicit.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're mixing crime syndicates, I mean, like, it's the Cosa Nostra, but like, you know, mummies involved instead.
And the question is like, are they evil, or is it just, okay, they do unsavory things? Are they the villains? I don't know, but I think there's a potential for them to be villains.
Yes, I agree with that. One thing that I was thinking about as well is that there is very obviously like a cultish quality or like an initiate quality to this whole mummy thing, because it's a process, right? you have to be turned into a mummy. So maybe like part of like the initiation process is you have to serve as an initiate for a while. You have to make sure that you're blooded in correctly and stuff like that. Now, the other part of the mummy lore, if we're going strictly by, universal monsters, then the mummy who returns from the dead is cursed, right? So the curse is what makes the scary monster mummy a mummy. It's because it's not that the body has been able to pass on peacefully. It is cursed with unlife and has to, there's various interpretations, but that's something that we can focus on as well, is this idea of curses. And we can loop back around to the kind of like language curse that I was talking about earlier. And I was thinking like the curse of ink or a curse in ink or something like that, where maybe speaking or reading words or something like that is a way to evoke some kind of monstrous entity as well. And so the shift away from written language was necessary to prevent this kind of eldritch being from entering the world. And if we wanted to make it so the mummies are evil, then you just have them be the cultists for that kind of monstrous entity. Because curses, I mean, it kind of works out if we do it that way.
Two things that might play into this is, one, given that these are now immortal beings, the idea of oral tradition becomes much more important because they have all of this knowledge that they've accumulated over centuries, which, the average person wouldn't, because everything is passed down word of mouth. And the other thing is the idea of like rituals and spells that take place over extremely long periods of time, like years, centuries, to cast a single spell. So they could be also doing something like that. And maybe that's how they're trying to summon their eldritch god or something.
Courtney, that part that you said is really brilliant. Like longevity of or power of the spell is directly related to how long you're speaking or how long you're able to maintain it, right? So if you have the song that never ends and you're able to lend out power, the power comes from its longevity, right? And mummies are taking that same concept, but they're perverting it because they are able to maintain this chant, this song, this ritual. And it just so happens that, hey, this ritual is going to take 1,000 years to complete to revive our dead god, but it will happen. And that's why we've been cursed with unlife, is to make sure that that ritual is not broken or something like that. So the more powerful you want the magic to be, the longer it has to go, the longer the chant, the longer the initiation. And mind you, this doesn't break the tenet of spells can only have relatively minor effects, because the stuff that normal magic can do is going to be relatively minor, because it's like you can only use it in like breaths or sentences at a time. Whereas this is like breaking that kind of paradigm, and for interesting reasons.
It seems like the pieces have all been put on the table for us, because we're speaking about an entity from the past that it needs to be, in a sense, pieced back together. And we have pieces of the god lying around. And I wonder if instead of the expected, which would be to literally put the pieces together, it's more about, it's not that the god was broken, but that its language was broken. And thus all of these factions have been created because they speak all pieces of the language. And maybe these mummies, in doing their long-term song, like are trying to put the language back together again.
Oh, so the mummies are actually not awful. They're not bad folks, is what you're suggesting.
I mean, maybe they have nefarious reasons, but it seems to me they're trying to complete a song of 1,000 years, right? That requires the pieces to be put together.
Writing that down.
Addendum to that, because that's obviously going to be the title. It's not song, it's dirge of 1,000 years.
Dirge.
Like,
Dirge.
Come on. Yes, absolutely. But Daniel, thank you for creating. Sorry, Cam, Daniel beat you to the title. But come on.
It makes you think of like Babel, right? Like, that was the key way to, that this is the way by which God broke them apart, is by destroying their language,
Right. Oh, that's so fucking cool. Damn it. I love it when a plan comes together like this, y'all. It's so good. And you know what the funny thing is? We haven't even gotten to our final tenet yet.
I know. Now Courtney put the icing on the cake here.
Yep.
or turn the cake upside down. We don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's start with, we're not at like the cherry yet. We're still like putting the topping. So I guess Courtney's going to be the sprinkle. So sprinkle some sprinkles on there for us, Courtney. What do you got for us?
All right. Now I feel like my second one is kind of lame because we already sort of covered it, but.
Well, let us know what it is and we'll find ways to make it really interesting and
more
fucked
cool.
up and weird. Yeah. So let's go. Team effort. We got you. We support you. Your tenet is good and valid and awesome. So let's hear it.
All right. It's just that while the deity currently exists, well, I had written down primarily in one form in the world, but it's been split up into 10.
I mean, technically one form split up. It's still one form.
Yeah. But you can still give it offerings from anywhere. Mm-hmm. So you can have an altar at home that you do these rituals to, or you make offerings to, and you receive spells. I don't know if that would appear as just like slips of paper or if it would be like a sigil that appears in like a scrying mirror or something like that. Like you see it and because it's not really written down like the more powerful or permanent spells would be, you kind of have to use it fairly quickly before it fades.
So it's like a little prayer. It's like a little shrine that you pray to and then you quick grab it real quick.
Right? Yeah.
And then like that's the power that you have. That's really fun. In what way is that lame? That's super interesting.
Yeah, I think that says something fundamental about the culture despite there being fractured. And that is, I think that despite that we all have different languages and this God's language has been broken, we're all still speaking the language of the God in a sense, right? So we're speaking different languages, but still one language. So these offerings they make, however they're doing it in their personal time, it's to the language of the God rather than the actual representation of it, the pieces that have been broken. So they're getting back little words maybe that they can recite, individual words that have really tiny effects in their personal space. And I mean, what I think is more important is that it speaks to the idea among the people that there was one language in the beginning, you know?
One thing that we haven't talked about at all is we have magic, right? What are the expressions of magic in this world? And I think that if we answer that, then we might be able to make Courtney's shrine deal make a little bit more sense, or at least give it some kind of interesting twist or spin or something like that. So what should magic or what can magic do in this world? What's the expression of magic?
Yeah, since the prompt specifies that it can only have minor effects, like
relatively minor.
Like I can't imagine that you'd be, sitting at home in your little shrine set up in your closet and like cursing an enemy to death or something. But I think you could probably do more minor
hold on.
things.
Curse to death? Who needs that? Curse of inconvenience. Now that, come on. You might not be able to kill somebody, but like, hey, this person is going to stub their toe real bad today, or they're going to get mud splashed on their shirt, or just every minor inconvenience that is like, it builds up and it builds up over time. And that's one way of thinking about it, right? And I'm noticing that the theme of curses is coming up, or at least the word curses is coming up repeatedly. So keep that in mind. But continue your thought, Courtney. I'm sorry, I'm getting very excited over here. I apologize.
No, I think you could probably use it for all sorts of fairly minor things, like keeping your plants healthy, or setting up a spell to feed your cat while you're away on vacation, or stuff like that, where it's like fairly simple things that, and especially in a world where there is no written language, or that most people can't understand written language, I think stuff like that would be important to making society function, I think.
Perhaps along those lines, like what the words do is give objects animus. So like if I'm trying to think of like what's the expression of the language of the God, right? So if I have a single word, maybe I can give an animus to a broom to clean my room, right? Or if I'm taking an industrialized spell, that's a set of longer instructions that gives a longer animus to things. So like if I'm able to read that whole spell, maybe I can have it construct a whole deck of my house, right? So then that obviates the need for hiring a bunch of laborers. And I'm thinking like, because like the spells in the sense are words, but they're also songs. So it's like perhaps, like they can have more mystical effects, more sacred effects, but the way people use them is more as instructions that command things to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I'm picturing like a prestidigitation sort of thing,
right?
For the most part,
it makes me think of Fantasia.
Yeah.
With Mickey and yeah.
Oh, classic trope, right? The other thing that I was thinking about is I was thinking back to our communist magic is for everyone thing. And I was thinking about like, well, a song is in your heart, right? So maybe I don't want to dismiss Daniel's idea, and I don't think I'm doing that inherently, but I want to think about this from another angle as well. Thinking about how magic is bodily, or at least maintained within the body. Because if magic is in your heart, magic is in your soul, then maybe it's expressed physically in some way as well. And I think that your animus idea still can definitely work. Like you carry that magic within you and then you touch something to imbue it with life. Like that is definitely something that can happen.
That's what I mean. Like maybe the words of the god go through you, right? So like when you read the text, it acts through you, and then whether it's touching something or whatever it is, like it gives that animus to other things.
I just like the idea that like the spells are bodily in some way, or it's not like you're warping fundamental realities. It's not like you can cast fireball, right? That's kind of what I'm interested in moving away from, is like being able to muck around with the foundational energies of the world. Like, oh, I don't want to be able to cast a lightning bolt, but I want to be able to have something work through me or something like that.
I mean, I could see singers like singing to something and it like comes awake, to do something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
So that requires your breath and your speech, right?
Right. And there's a sonic element to it as well. So like it has to be like, that's actually really interesting when we think about it.
Or you play an instrument and then sing, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, 100%. Because we don't think about what sound is, right? It's literally the vibrations in the air. And so you're literally breathing life into these things. You're breathing life into the world when you're doing something like that. So yeah, that absolutely works. That's dope.
Yeah, it's like transferring energy from your body, within your body, into other objects or things like that.
Right. Yeah. That's okay. That's cool. That's interesting. I'm down with that. Okay. Holy shit. We're like almost an hour into this. Holy shit. Okay, we got to do the recap and then we got to roll for the twist. All right. Daniel, your first tenet, what was it?
My first tenet was that the people in the world are illiterate, and illiteracy is an incredibly rare skill akin to esoteric knowledge.
Okay. Are you satisfied with that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty essential. I would say we have room to like figure out someone who can read. Like they must have very particular importance, and I imagine there's flavors of them. There's like a bard that sings versus someone who can actually read and just reads. Like there's probably different kinds of classes if this were a game, of adventurer.
Question: do we want to associate reading with evil in some way? And not entirely evil, but like maybe most of the people who know how to read are using it for nefarious purposes. Like the mummies are all literate or something like that.
I think it should vary by the faction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I could see it being viewed differently, like, or there's a mistaken belief that it is evil in certain areas because of stuff like the mummies, but it can be used for good.
Gotcha. I'm cool with that. All right. My first tenet. I legitimately don't remember what my first tenet was. What was it?
Crap, what was your first tenet? Second tenet was mummies. First tenet was...
Mummies is foundational. Yeah, of course. Oh, the sing part. Yeah.
Oh, right. Singing. Yeah.
All right. So, so my first tenet was the element of diction and pitch and like singing or performance has to be imbued in order for you to cast the spell. And considering the talk that we've had, I feel like that's pretty well established at this point. We kind of ran through what that might look like, how it might be expressed. And that's interesting. Yeah, I'm happy with how it worked out, unless some of you aren't.
That sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. Because it creates like almost like different classes of readers. You have the singer, and that's essential to it because it's the way it's intoned. And I bet some of the faction languages, like we said, are like an Asian language that has a particular way of pronouncing it that contributes to its meaning.
Yeah. Courtney, your first tenet.
Mine was that I wanted there to be some country or city-state that treats spells as something distributed to its citizens based on their needs. And I liked that we had that like ever singing cathedral idea that came out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy with how that kind of worked out as well.
Mm.
I think that type of tenet is definitely something that I think requires a little bit more context to kind of build out a little bit more. But I think that we've kind of established them as a interesting like foil to some of the other like Daniel's pre-established uber industrialized thing, you know? So yeah, all right. Speaking of Daniel, let's loop it back to Daniel. What is your second tenet, sir?
My second tenet is the god being broken into pieces.
Okay. I'd say that's pretty foundational to the setting at this point, right?
Yeah, and I think the idea of it producing spells as capital is done in different ways depending on where those pieces are.
Right. Who has the means of production or the means of spell casting? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did this deity choose to be fractured, or was it something that was done to it?
I don't know.
The easy answer is that whatever destroyed the god destroyed the language, kind of what Daniel was saying earlier.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that's the easy answer. Maybe a twist will help us kind of answer something else.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. Like maybe we hold off on answering that for the time being. My second tenet was hyper specific in honor of Brendan Fraser. We have a
Oscar winner, Brendan Fraser.
Oh God, you're right. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oscar winner, Brendan Fraser. We have a syndicate of organized crime mummies, and we've talked about them. I think that we've integrated some cool lore behind them. I think that they could use a little bit more oomph to get us all the way there. I think that there's some questions that we could still answer, but I think that answering the twist is probably a good way to get some solid answers out of that idea.
Yeah, agreed.
And Courtney, finish us off here. What was your second tenet?
That was that even though the deity exists in like physical forms, you can still give it offerings from anywhere. And it kind of speaks to you in the form of the sigils that we had discussed earlier.
Yeah, I think that works.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it granting like a vestige of power or some way or magic, right? Like maybe it's just a note or a chord or a singular word that needs to be put together with other things. But yeah, I think that works. How do you feel about it, Courtney?
Yeah, I like it. I like that it's sort of a much more personal sort of state of being of this magic as opposed to the much more industrialized pieces of the deity, or even like the cathedral in my communist setting where there's this constant singing.
Yeah. I do think that there is probably something to the expression of the shrine as well. You know, like depending on how the shrine looks or the location, even it probably differs greatly. I'm thinking about like people who might carry a traveling shrine or people who might carry like a little box around their neck that they can just whisper into. And like, that's kind of how they pray or something like that.
Oh, interesting. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. There's all sorts of cool things that you can do with like what a shrine should look like and what it can express as a result, you know?
Yeah.
All right. So we've got the tenets, we've got the recap. It's time to roll the twist. And our twist for this time is the protagonist / hero has a savior complex so bad they caused the problems.
Oh, well, I guess that kind of speaks to the question you had earlier.
You know, honestly, this, yeah. So I suppose if we see this as hero / protagonist as the god, so it has a savior complex so bad it caused the problems. The problem, I imagine, being it split itself up, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It makes me think that because the mummies are really old, right? So perhaps among them there was one that was, this is just a throwing that's out there, that was trying to unite society, did it, made one language, and then that, and in turn caused it to be split apart for some reason.
Yeah. I was also thinking that it could relate to one of the mummies, like one of the original ones, or maybe even the original one.
Yes, that's what I was
Who's
thinking.
still around, by the way.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
gotta have,
Of course. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Ooh, you know what you could do too with that is you can make the mummies more nuanced. Like the original one is a big bad, but the rest of them, they're trying to do something good, even though they're criminal organizations.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're opposed to him in some way or her.
Yeah. No, we're not talking about the Tom Cruise mummy, Daniel. You get that shit out of here.
I've never seen. Oh, it was a her. Yeah. Was it a her?
It was, and it was terrible.
Another thing that you could do too is like that is the origin of the mummy's curse, is whatever it did way back when, to whether it was like fracturing the deity or doing something. Maybe back then it thought that it was like rebelling against some force that had grown too powerful, and it wanted to like reduce that power. And unfortunately, this was the result. And in doing so, it got cursed with this eternal life.
Okay, hear me out. Maybe this original, yes, I love that idea, Courtney, 100%. I'm adding on to it. Maybe the thing that it did was seek out and destroy other languages. So in its head, in its canon, in its heart, it's like, okay, evil is being spoken through these other languages. So there is a grand unifying language, but in doing so, it shatters the god or something like that. So that's where the curse comes from. And okay. So maybe the curse that it holds is its ability to remember and speak other languages, and that has denigrated it or cursed it in some way.
It's both like the main mummy's multilingual, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like that, because that means he's very dangerous, you know?
Yeah. Oh, wait, that's actually pretty fucking cool now.
That is very cool. Yeah.
Okay.
And he could potentially, if he unwraps himself, potentially he could hide among any society, right? So he's almost like a changeling or a shapeshifter in a sense.
Yeah. You're not wrong. So let's tie back to the twist. The protagonist has a savior complex so bad they cause the problems. So is it the god who encouraged this behavior and unwittingly shattered himself by like wanting some grand unification of language? It's a reverse Babel.
I don't know. I feel like because you're saying the original mummy was trying to destroy the other languages to create a one language, right?
Right.
And I think this is the case of like mankind bringing this upon themselves. Like they create this one language, and for some reason I don't want the god to be evil. I feel like maybe that is he had tried to create it by doing this, and he did create a unified language. Maybe, and for a time, maybe he did rule and things were peaceful, but things went wrong eventually.
Right.
And then it broke apart.
Yeah, I want to clarify. I'm not trying to make the god evil, but like,
no,
when it has a savior complex so bad that they cause problems, like, what does that look like? You know?
Yeah, I think the mummy has a savior complex so bad.
That's what I'm thinking too. And like, back then it did whatever it did to cause the split, whether it was like unifying languages or destroying languages. And maybe now, like, it does
not both, right?
Right, yeah. And the twist does say like hero / protagonist, so maybe they do want to fix things, and maybe they're trying to figure out how to do that. But many of the people that they've attracted as their sort of mummy subservience are not the most well-intentioned people.
I mean, to your point too, like in order to have made this happen, right, he had to have created a god, or at least the body of the god, like in destroying the other languages to create the one language. Maybe that is the piecing together of this thing, right, which then creates the language, creates a society that he rules over. And I think perhaps over time, the other mummies or whatever, something happens in this so-called perfect society, or this pharaoh dynasty that goes wrong, which then leads to a Tower of Babel situation. Maybe not caused by a god, but caused by the people themselves rebelling against the situation and then breaking apart the actual god he built.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hold on. Idea? What do you think about the idea that the sigils that represent the broken pieces are like the languages themselves? Right.
Yeah.
So
that's my thought of it too.
Yeah. He like forged these sigils to create an eidolon of his perfect deity.
Yes.
Like all together. And then it I don't know. That's kind of what I've got. And like, you guys can be smarter than me and like add some stuff in here.
No, I like that, because then he's got this structure. Maybe he does succeed in uniting the people, but it's a tenuous unification, right? Like people demand to have their own tongues, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, like people must be able to speak not just one language, but a proliferation. Like diversity is required for society, right?
Right.
And so over time, things fall apart.
Right. So a grand unification isn't even necessarily a good thing, right?
Right. Exactly.
So the God coming back together might not even be like what's best for the world. Like we might want to see it broken down even further or something like that. Or at least like become like, maybe it's too late, like something like that. Yeah, that's good. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Because it does tie into like the idea that, languages, when they die out in the real world, like that's such a great loss of history that takes place, because a lot of the languages that do die out just had, oral traditions. Like if you think about Native American languages, some of which there might only be a few speakers left who know all of the stories.
Yeah. I mean, that actually is really poignant in a world where written language doesn't exist, right? Where memory and language is solely through the spoken word, solely through the expression of the individual, right? So memory also has a lot to do with it. Yeah, goddamn. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. Well, I feel like we've already kind of created factions here, y'all. Like, do we even need to do that part at this point? Like we've created a robust world filled with mummies and shrines and communists. Like
singing communists. Yeah.
Singing. Well, I mean, that's
everybody's singing, but yeah. I feel like we've got a pretty solid selection of factions too. And like even with the mummy thing that we just discussed, there's kind of a main quest there of like,
absolutely,
keeping this guy from doing what he's going to do. Or
by the way, I realize that we haven't defined modern yet. And I would like to define modern as strictly the time period of the 1999 movie with Academy Award winning Best Actor Brendan Fraser. So strictly that time era is what we're talking about when we talk about modern. How do we feel about that?
Okay. And the mummy is the mummy from that movie.
Oh, what's his name? Arnold something, right?
Like, it's like not Billy Zane is how I remember him.
He looks just like Billy Zane, but he's not Billy. I think his name's like Arnold something, isn't it?
I think so.
Or Darnold. It's something weird. I swear. It's something like that.
Arnold Vosloo.
Yeah, there we go. I knew it was Arnold. Okay, gotcha. All right. Okay. Daniel, you just have to nod your head and we will understand that you agree with this pact that we're making here.
Don't know what it means, but I'm glad you guys are excited.
Good. Okay. Wait, Daniel, have you not seen The Mummy?
Oh, I've seen.
Okay. I was going to fly out to Boston to make sure that we watched it.
The second Mummy I remember seeing in the theater, and when at the very end, isn't there like some like epic charge with some warriors or something?
Oh yeah,
everyone like cheered. They lost their minds in that particular one.
I watched that movie when it came out in the drive-in, because where I grew up there was a drive-in movie theater.
I miss drive-in.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, they just don't exist anymore.
I think I've seen the second one, but I'm not sure. I know I haven't seen the third one, but the first one is just like too good.
Courtney, I watched the second one on DVD with your boyfriend, and we watched and had a grand old time together.
Nice.
Yeah, has some good moments in it. One of my favorite during that screening, Courtney. I know that we're going way off here, but I don't care. During that screening, Courtney, there is a scene where a little pygmy guy like pole vaults using a spear and then skewers a man, and your boyfriend and I laughed our fucking heads off and rewound that scene no less than 2 or 3 times. So,
amazing.
Yeah. Fond memories when we were but children. But yeah, it was good times. And I think that you can tell from our love and our joy of this setting that we had a great time building it.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Cam, for sending in.
Oh, absolutely. Cam, if you have another setting that you want to send in, please go right ahead. Please do so. We'll be happy to build it. And maybe throw in some mummy references. Why not? Or not. I mean, it's your setting. You don't need to.
I've been looking for a setting to create with bards for OSR Plus, so I may steal this one as well.
Daniel, you're more than welcome to. Of course you are.
Where everyone plays a bard. I once played a game that was super fun, but I always thought it would be neat to have a setting where
that's just a rock band, Daniel. Yeah, everyone's a bard. It's a rock band.
I thought it'd be neat to have a setting where it's like the heroes have to be bards because of the setting itself, which I think the setting lends itself to that.
We've created several settings like that already.
Oh yeah. But this one, like, it seemed more fundamental to it. You know what
Oh,
I mean?
okay.
Mm-hmm.
I got you. Well, I think the heavy metal one, right? Like literally.
Oh, I love that.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
that's true. That's a fun one.
We also had the musical one, which was also fundamental to
it. Was a Western, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was like Space
Western.
Yeah.
Space Western.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, this is another great musical repertoire that we've added on here.
It has some versatility too, because it's like you could play bards, but you could have like more of a quieter character who's like a scribe or something and would work.
Sure.
Yeah, like a cleric type.
Yeah.
Yep. Or you could be a mummy.
Versatility.
Or,
Like,
yeah,
you could play. It's true. You could play mummy because mummies aren't all evil. We determined that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, come on. Okay, so let's be real. What is the biggest trope when it comes to like mafia or like crime syndicate folk? Like, it's anti-hero who is I'm no longer in the mob. I'm no longer part of that world.
Yeah.
But you still have the knowledge.
Tricks.
Exactly.
I'm picturing like, the Invisible Man, he's got like the wraps, like in like the jacket. That's kind of what I'm seeing for some of these guys.
I'm thinking just like a punk rock mummy who is like wearing like a tattered t-shirt, and it's like, oh wow, what are you wearing? Rags? Oh, what are you wearing? Wraps? And then he unwraps and it's like all tattooed and like glyphs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And also leather jacket over it, of course. With studs and everything. Anyway, okay, you clearly had a lot of fun with this one. So again, like Courtney said before, a big thank you to Cam, and a big thank you to all of you for listening. If you want to spark joy within us, you can do so by sending in a prompt and having us build your world by going over to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, where you can click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. Of course, if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so by going over to Twitter and following @Let'sWorldBuild, where we tweet about stuff occasionally. Of course, if you want to talk to us more directly, you can always go to our Discord. Link for that in the description and through the website, where you can come chat with us, submit prompts, chat about whatever you want. For example, the 1999 classic starring Oscar winner Brendan Fraser, The Mummy. Well, come and express how much you love that film, whatever. And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous for whatever reason, right, you can always give us money over on Patreon, where you get access to sweet, sweet patron-only goodies, including double the length of your prompt setting prompt. Yep. You get access to patron-only Discord channels, patron-only episodes, early episodes, and a couple of other good stuff. It's all there. Go to our Patreon, give us money, and we will thank you very much for it. And with all of that out of the way, that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week. And if you haven't seen The Mummy, you need to.
Yes, please go watch The Mummy right now.
Right now.